So welcome to today's Resibuild Podcast on Constructive Conversations. I'm Nick Haughton, the host from Sapphire Balconies, and today I'm joined by Andy Crooks, who is a specialist in building control inspection. We're going to be digging into the topic around fire safety and how building inspection has changed. As we all know, building inspectors are well known for pulling out tape measures and measuring things. Today we're going to pull out the theoretical tape measure and we're going to measure the sentiment and what's been changing and how we can gauge what that might mean for the residential construction industry moving forward. So welcome, Andy.
Thank you.
Would you mind starting by telling us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Not at all. Andy Crooks. I've been in building control now for 35 years. I spent 17 years in local government building control. So I've worked on the enforcement side of building regulations, and then I left that. I left those authorities back in 2007. Moved over to be a building inspector within the private sector, working for an approved inspector. And since that time, I have worked for 2 approved inspectors and secured the license of 1 other approved inspector as a registered building control approver back when the whole regulatory changes occurred in 2023-24. And that's my background. My qualifications are that I'm a chartered surveyor, chartered building engineer. I qualified as a corporate fire engineer back in 2002. And more recently, having sat all those qualifications that now mean nothing to building control, we had to all sit and be peer reviewed or sit exams to make sure that we were registered at the appropriate grades. And I'm also now a class 3G and H specialist building inspector and also a class 4 technical manager. Having said that, I no longer work within building control. I now work for my own building safety consultancy, having retired and got extremely bored. Back in February, I started up again. I haven't any intention to work within as a registered building control approver. I just want to keep it small and just do consultancy work, which is what I've been engaged in ever since February. Yeah. And I'm a little bit busier than I expected to be, I must admit.
And tell us a bit about your experience with different working groups and so on as well.
Well, I suppose my position as I was a CEO of 1 approved inspector and the executive director of another, and that position sort of made me manage the external relationships, if you like, part of which of my duty was I worked for the Association of Corporate Approved Inspectors, which later became the Association of Building Control Approvers, and I was their vice chairman. I still consult into those. And although I'm not a member of the working parties anymore, the working groups that the HSE have, I was part of working group 3 that dealt with capacity and resource. And also I was, those were latterly merged into working group 1, which also dealt with the actual procedural aspects of compliance as well. Yeah. So I've worked directly with the HSE in shaping the, being a consultant to the shaping of the legislation as it ended up. Yeah. That included sort of looking at the practicalities of, on various other specialist interest groups on the actual sequencing of work and how this would actually work in practice. Yeah. So, yeah, I've been quite active in that. I've also been a consultant into what was DLUC at the time, now back to sort of MHCLG again. And I attended regular meetings with them to sort of, be a consultant on a very, very slow release of legislation, or the bits of legislation that we're actually changing.
Yeah, sure. So to start off with, I think we've all known there's been a huge change since the tragic incident at Grenfell. With that, we've seen uncertainty, we've seen lots of frustration with the new regime, with the regulator and so on. But I'd be interested in your take to start off with. What's the sentiment generally in the industry around fire safety and around the whole, the new regime?
I guess we've been overly fire safety centric over the past few years. People have become extremely nervous about committing either to endorsing what's actually submitted, and also the BSR have become incredibly sort of almost the expectations of the regulator have been extreme. So they've taken duty holders and competence and they've turned it into something where they've given no advice. And I think that's becoming a little bit more pragmatic at the moment. I think they're starting to change their culture. They're starting to realize that the delays that are being experienced in the approval process are resulting in the fact that they're getting some bad press. And as they're slowly getting used to it, it's the application times are starting to speed up. Certainly culturally, people are, generally speaking, disappointed with those delays and want to know how things can be speeded up. I think that the consultants that work for the BSR that actually deliver the building control technical appraisal, they tend to concentrate in structure and means of escape and all of the scheduled technical requirements. And these periphery supplementary documents that need to sort of get put onto the back burner. So it isn't uncommon in my experience for the technical stuff to nearly be there, you know, for them to be in a position where they've got their requirements set, they know where they're submitting it, and all of a sudden they find fault in a fire and emergency plan maybe 9 months down the line because it possibly hasn't been read at that time, and they discover it's inadequate. So I think it's become slightly frustrating. But I think that the designers are getting more used to that sort of paperwork. They're getting more used to managing the expectations of the regulator, actually sort of, you know, getting to grips with knowing what they actually want. They're more consultative. By way of example, I had a recent job where I was asked to do a fire and emergency plan for a hospital. And the fire and emergency plan that was presented to me, and they just had their application rejected as a result of it. It was Gateway 2 application rejected. They completely, they got basically full approval, if you like, for their technical stuff, but their periphery paperwork hadn't consulted with the main staff. So when you're dealing with a hospital, you're dealing with a whole set of health and technical memoranda, which requires the separation between compartments and the access onto the hospital street. And the management of the evacuation is wholly done by staff. They hadn't asked the staff whatsoever about what they needed to actually action their means of escape. So it was that held the application up and resulted in the application being rejected. So it can be just frustrating, I think, all around. And of course, building inspectors, because they've gone through their requalification processes, there's less of them. So at Gateway 3, I think there's around about 600. Some are plan inspection, some are plan checking, and others are site inspection only. And the predominance of resource was that the local authorities that had around about half of those registered building inspectors at Class 3 were getting approached to do it. That was coordinated through the local authority hub, but obviously concentrated within London. They also put a bid out that wasn't particularly well advertised amongst approved inspectors to actually go for an approved inspector bid. There was about 5, including my old approved inspector, that actually won that bid to consult, and they have a substantial amount of Class 3 surveyors employed pretty much full time on HRB consideration. What's happened in more recent months is they've reopened that and started to award contracts to other registered building control approvers that have increased that resource. So hopefully that will have a net gain in the speed in which it's done. But overall, building inspectors, we have far less of them now than we used to. Anecdotally, I heard figures sort of said about 7,500 employed in the industry at various different grades and capabilities. What's actually happened is we've got around about 2,000 Class 2 surveyors that can deal with properties up to 18 metres, so below the in-scope layer, and then there's around about 600. So our numbers have quite significantly reduced. You don't need to sit a formal exam to register as a technical manager. So the outlying procedural and legal issues aren't necessarily tested, and there's an unfamiliarity with the law, I find, when we actually sort of look at professional competency. I assess for one particular body called Total Training and Development, I beg your pardon, that is one of the qualification routes. And that general management competency tends to, and everything's changed. So we have new operational standards rules that we have to obey. The last building control performance standards were guidance only. So now we have professional conduct rules, we have operational standards rules that registered building control approvers and local authorities must follow. And it's the way that the BSR then monitor those returns to actually see whether or not they're doing their job properly. And there's this culture of sort of fear amongst building regs people that they need to go back and turn the clock back many, many years. And we used to be used as design advice. Now that has completely turned on its head, and we expect the designers to actually demonstrate how they actually comply with the regs now. And I think that's the whole of the culture change that's sort of been experienced over the last few years. But registered building control approvers registered building inspectors have diminished quite a lot. And an awful lot of people that have the capability of probably qualifying at class 2 and class 3 haven't. So we have a plethora.
Haven't qualified or haven't attempted it?
Well, they're registered, but they're only registered at the trainee grade, which is class 1. So they've got sort of, close to 1,800 people on the register, as far as we know, that have only registered to class 1. And they have the capability, working under supervision, to work on some of the other stuff. But would you put a class 1 surveyor on a class 3 job? You'd probably have your doubts. And why haven't you gone for class 3 anyway? So, but it isn't. The qualification process isn't necessarily all that straightforward.
So that process you talk about there of the process of looking at the giving design advice ultimately, that might have been part of a historic. What's the minimum I need to get away with this, or to move the project on? Not necessarily that people were attempting to get around things, but just making it easy for complying and moving on. Do you think that mindset as an industry, and obviously we've seen some really horrendous examples of that in the Grenfell inquiry, but do you think we've moved away from that generally as an industry and there's much better practice there? What's your take on that?
I do. The duty holder and competence regulations, this thing that came in October 2023, which prescribed the client assessing the capability of his principal designer and principal contractor appointments. I think that nobody in the, I beg your pardon, fewer people in the domestic sector are actually quite used to that at the moment. But we're seeing the results. As soon as something unusual comes in, building inspectors are prevented from giving direct design advice. I've been guilty in the past of setting policy for acceptance in, say, open plan loft conversion situations, of me setting a policy of acceptance of certain features being involved in that building. Those policies have now been withdrawn because they go directly against the limits of approval, if you like. I wasn't giving direct design advice, I was giving general design advice. And although that's still allowable under the operational standards rules, it's certainly discouraged. So what we've seen a prevalence of, particularly within the domestic marketplace, is people being shocked with not being able to do what they normally do, and actually being asked for them to go out and get third-party justification for that, which forms an awful lot of my business. And when we get into the high rise, the regulator's particularly aggressive that it is the designer's responsibility to assert compliance via these various documents and the building control compliance statement, which is also becoming one of the, inside the building control compliance statement, which is submitted for in-scope buildings. They need to explain how they've designed their building, to what guidance they've designed their building. They then need to supplement the information And what I think that they aren't necessarily doing particularly well is forming the construction control plan to actually manage the expectations of the regulator, to manage the requirements, which are a bit like an old-fashioned conditional approval, where you might be talking about sort of sprinklers, for instance, inside these buildings. And for a multi-use building, for a commercial installation where you've got extensive retail units underneath, you're going to need quite a large room in which you can pop your sprinkler tank. But for your residential sprinklers, which don't have the same demand, but they need to know in principle that it complies. But at the time of design, you won't necessarily want to commit to that expense entirely. You just want to partner with somebody early as a principal designer, make sure that you have it in principle, and actually give them the information as to when that will be expected, and that ask for them to actually put a requirement on the approval to actually endorse you submitting that information later. So there are the major changes, I think. Designers need to take full responsibility for what they actually do. And that's always been the case since back in 1991, because building control have never been liable in the negligence of tort for or responsible for compliance. But I think what muddied the water was that building control back in the 90s, the NHBC, they predate most of approved inspectors and they self-insure, but the approved inspectors were licensed in the mid-90s as a result of a piece of case law that defined the liability in negligence. And I think since the advent of competition, people have competed based on technical requirements. It was always against the code of conduct, but essentially we've been used as design consultants. And I think that's the thing that's stopped. And as architects get more acceptant of that, things are becoming a little bit easier in building control. They're getting used to it. The regulators are getting used to it. They're getting used to the way the regulators, designers are getting used to the way that the regulators actually work. And we're seeing more expeditious consideration of building control applications as a result, hopefully. And hopefully that's set to continue under the transfer of the BSR away from the HSE and its very slow transfer into DLUC. So, it'd be interesting to see how it develops.
So the point you make, the point about the conditional approvals and so on, you're referring there, are you, to the new method, or the since the leadership change, obviously been the fast track announced and so on. Is that the point there, or are you talking about that more generally?
Generally speaking, it is within the HRB regulations when you're dealing with an in-scope building. So you obviously get an approval in principle of the plans that you've actually put forward. Slightly different in domestics, and we'll cover that in a second. But in the HRB approval, they can attach requirements to stage further design information, and it's better that the architect takes control over that within his construction control plan to say when that's going to be made available. And then you can trickle information through to the regulator about those particular requirements. But it would be good if the principal designers and designers told them when that information was actually going to be available, and gave them a date and made sure that they stuck to those dates inside the construction control plan program. So I think that's what a conditional approval has actually turned into. A local authority still is obliged, if it receives a full plans application, to either pass or reject those plans. They've taken it out of the Building Act and they've popped it into the building regulations, under which they are procedurally governed for domestic construction. So it is possible to receive a conditional approval. Structural calculations for X, Y, Z inside a domestic property is quite a common one. And then, maybe a fire safety design or whatever, but that would be less usual. So they still work fairly traditionally. If you go to a registered building control approver you won't get approval, but their job is differently defined. So their roles are very specifically defined inside law to take such steps as are reasonable within the limits of professional skill and care to ensure likely compliance with the regulations. and those regulations being the technical requirements and the various other responsibilities that cascade down from those. So what they tend to do, and what local authorities tend to do now, is they actually issue a tracker, which picks out the relevant requirements of the regulations, and then in the domestic arena, they can do that. But the intention in the HRB, the building control compliance statement, is that the designer takes control of asserting how his job actually complies inside that building compliance statement, inside that. And, we just become a column on the end to pass comment against that. And it would be good if that model could be rolled out all the way across the market, the whole residential from domestics upwards sector. So it actually allowed the architects an easier way to actually get their message across as to how they propose it complies. You can refer to specific plans, you can refer to specific designer details such as structural engineers, fire engineers, mechanical and electrical engineers within that statement, and guide building control building inspectors to how that job actually complies. And if they take better control of that and actually guide them using that building control compliance statement, as I say, from domestics all the way to in-scope buildings, life would be an awful lot easier. But it is starting to happen inside the domestic sector. I'm just dealing with I won't give you the specific reference, but it's a very, very, very old grade 1 listed building where 4 of this particular street is being changed into public use, and the architectural lead there has made up very, very useful building control compliance statements to explain how his very unusual design actually is approvable. And so by the time it gets to us, we're just passing comment against his general assertions. If we disagree with them, we qualify that disagreement and go back. We had a small dispute over fire alarms, which is currently being considered. And, he has a complete understanding of what he needs to do. Entirely good understanding of what he needs to do. I know where he's going. I can then, when I'm dealing with the statutory consultations, because on this one I'm actually working on a registered building control approver's behalf, and everybody knows where they are. So we can tie up all of the relevant bodies together. So this building is very, very well controlled from design through to construction and its continued use, because they've got a very, very good approach towards fire strategies. So it's it's a good way of working.
So just chuck here a separate but related point in here. If there's a product manufacturer sitting there thinking that ultimately the weakest link in the chain depends on the approval or not, particularly of a high-rise building, if I'm a diligent, proactive company looking to streamline that process, making sure that you're understanding the right approach in it, how can you make product compliance easy for a Gateway 2 application? What would you say to that?
I don't think it is easy. I really don't think it is easier. Easier. I think by managing the expectations of the regulator, you can certainly make it easy.
But as a product manufacturer, you're not dealing directly with the regulator.
No, you'd be a designer. So it's making sure that you have your competence catalogued, you have your skills, knowledge, experience and behaviours catalogued, probably within a nice glossy, to be able to convince principal designers and also the client that you ultimately serve that you're capable of actually doing it. Have that pre-prepared. When it comes to managing the expectations of the regulator, I would expect designers to be able to be consulted early in principle. Your details are slightly different as a sort of, specified attachment manufacturer, so to speak, because it's easier to actually give the complete specification of materials earlier on in construction. And make sure that you're completely transparent in the circulation of that stuff, because it does affect other people's work. Specifically, if you're putting balconies onto existing concrete structures and what have you, the structural engineer is going to know how those things need to be fitted. Pull-out tests are going to need to be performed on the structure, and you're going to need to convince the structural engineers that it's going to actually work. So giving them the information when that information is going to be available is key, really. But I think it's about managing expectations. So if you're looking towards fire, you might want to put a general specification down for your fire alarm. You might want to put a general specification down for your ventilation system within the staircase enclosure, or the sprinkler specification. And you work in partnership with those people to agree in principle what you're actually going to do. But if you're controlling the expectation, you can hopefully manage and get a quicker approval by managing the requirements and promising the information that at a later stage when the detailed design's being done, once general approval has been sought for everything. So I think it's about managing the managing that regulator's expectation, showing them that you're good at managing a project, showing them that you're good at and you're taking change control seriously, building contingencies into what you actually do, what happens if, and making sure that your construction control plan is very geared up to what will be provided when and how. And remember that the Gateway 2 information is reviewed at Gateway 3 as well. So it is the preparatory work to check whether or not the building is built in the way that it was actually intended. So those supplementary documents, such as the fire and emergency file, such as the change control plan, the mandatory occurrence plan, everything like that is preparation and is revised. It's a live document all the way through Gateway 3. It's not about it stopping at Gateway 2. It still gets reviewed to see whether or not you've been living the dream in accordance with your plan at the end of the job as well.
Yeah, and certainly from a balcony point of view, we've been involved in more than 20 applications in Gateway 2. I'm not aware any of those are refurbs. They're pretty much all new build, if not entirely new build. We also have this project here has just achieved Gateway 3, which is
an achievement.
It's the first one in the UK, which is first new build residential one to achieve Gateway 3 approval. But I think some of the things we've certainly learned is having having the information clearly signposted, show your workings, if you like, makes it simple, signposting it to relevant information, but also having the substance behind it, that if somebody wants to satisfy themselves as an approver, the BSR want to drill in, for example, into wind loadings, or they want to look at the structural requirements or the fireproofing around the balcony anchors, that information is there, but you've also got, for example, what testing you've done on your structural loadings and the calculations behind that, demonstrating that, or the fire safety test which you've done, the certifications from Exova or whoever was used for the testing of a related and relevant scenario to what is being shown on drawings. But certainly it is on product manufacturers to make sure they've got good quality information, and to do that you need to be doing the right testing, and you need to have the right process in place, as you say, those control measures to actually control it once it goes through. You need that seamless quality control process, don't you?
You do, and so many aspects of what you've just said impact on others.
Yeah.
The majority of it being structural. And it all goes towards making sure that you're sharing that information. The whole, when you're building your golden thread of information, you need to know that you've got accurate certification, that people can review that, they can see it's been done properly, that they've got a really good record of what's actually been undertaken. Judith Hackett, I think, when she announced her phase 1 report, she said that she drove an old Fiesta. And if she wanted a part from the old Fiesta, all she needed to do was ring up Ford and they'd give her the part number and she knew exactly what to source. And our buildings weren't designed like that. There's few times when, the reason behind the golden thread is to allow the people access to the information they need to be able to control any future work, to know what's actually happened on their site. And we've not been able to do that. Taking this holistic, all access everything approach as you do from Gateway 2 onwards. And if some aspect of that changed, if the structural engineer turned around to you and said, I'm sorry, but that's impossible, you're going to interfere with the reinforcement in this concrete frame or whatever, you put that in your change control plan, don't you?
Yeah.
Even as a designer. So you actually make sure that you can react to that and that you've got a catalog reaction to that all the way through the process. So it sounds like you've got it nailed, really. And if you've got Gateway 3 approval, you most definitely have on that job. What about the other 20? Are they advanced on site or are they awaiting Gateway 3 approval?
Most of them have been waiting for more than 40 weeks.
Yeah, really?
Not, I say most, there are quite a number which are over 40 weeks now.
Yeah.
Some are being postponed for ridiculous reasons still. One of the clients told me last week actually that the submission they made 14 weeks back, they've just had a request for them to resend the links because nobody downloaded the links and the document hosting site, the link has expired now.
Oh, God.
So they've sat on it for 14 weeks ultimately.
Yeah.
But I think the management of those processes and the collaboration which is needed up front is an absolute must. Bringing together, as you say, the interface between multiple different companies is the critical piece there and is the highest risk area.
It is.
But certainly managing that process, not whilst the golden thread might be mandated at a project level, it's imperative that manufacturers are holding that information at their own level as well, at a high level of detail.
Yeah.
It might not be that we pass everything over, but certainly can you identify a balcony and what bracket it was connected to and which apartment that's attached to, because even if you've got a project with 200 identical balconies, that's a stroke dream, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But the connection of those anchors to the slab, where those sit on the slab, where those balconies are joined, that information, all the way down to who did it, what was their training, what tests did they, knowledge tests that have been done, what was the supervision in the factory, all those processes, capturing that information. You might not want to pass it over or might not need to pass it over for the management of the golden thread at a project level, but it's imperative that manufacturers are going above and beyond compliance.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and it's interesting that you use the word capture them, because at Gateway 3, you're absolutely right. You've got every nut and bolt actually catalogued, if you like, in the design information, but it's how you capture that to actually convince the regulator that you've actually lived the dream and built it properly. And so you need to be able to catalogue the compliance of your work all the way through. And that's when I do expert witness work, photographs tend to be everything. You get the majority of the information that you can actually get from photographs. The way that the legislation's developed from a building control point of view, the expectations of the operational standards rules is that they geotag their photographs, that they actually date and timestamp them, that they're location specific, that you can identify which part of the building was actually, has actually been evidenced. And I think that the change is building control can't do everything.
Yeah.
Otherwise the thing would cost an absolute fortune.
Yeah.
So it's down to you to be able to catalogue that compliance, to be able to predict the sampling that will be requested at Gateway 3 for the review of those fixing details and what have you. So it's about making sure that when that golden thread is built, that you have something in the background that will actually substantiate that you've built it properly, that you can evidence that you've built it properly. And if sampling is taken, because that's all that they do, they wouldn't look at thousands of connections, that you can say, yes, I've got that, and provide them with the confidence.
Yeah.
They might not even check it, to be quite honest with you, but if it's available to them, and if you're doing things properly and making sure that you've catalogued every nut and bolt and get the fitters to actually make sure that they're taking photographs at the pertinent time to actually identify that and where it is on the building, whether it's a grid line and a floor level or whatever, then generally speaking, that's extremely good practice. And it is the level of detail that's required at Golden Thread. They want to be able to take samples of that information gathering, seek whether or not the Golden Thread's actually been, built properly. And they don't need to look at it. They just need to know whether or not there's evidence exists, because it isn't their responsibility to comply. It's quite firmly yours as a fitter of the balcony, designer and fitter, contractor involved in that construction. So you should be able to take that from cradle to, let's not say grave.
Cradle to cradle.
Cradle to the occupation. Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, to make sensible decisions about it. So it's about making sure that you've got that complete picture from design through to construction and handover.
And as you mentioned, the installers is a critical part of that. But as a product manufacturer, we're not directly employing contractors. However, those contractors, absolutely, our reputation hangs on that.
Yeah.
But also, it is our responsibility as well, morally, if not legally, to make sure that we are assessing those the competence of those people, the SCEB, as you referred to earlier.
Yeah.
And measuring and understanding what those are, and providing the knowledge and input of how your product should be both installed properly, but also maintained properly and so on. But
absolutely. But also, it would almost be your job to plan and manage, because you're looking and monitoring that work. So, when you look at your duty holding responsibilities, you have a duty to plan, manage and monitor the design process. However, that's insufficient for you. If you have a role as a contractor monitor, or the whoever's fitting the balcony, when you actually monitor those, you're actually doing a capability assessment of those against that criteria. It's what I said at the very beginning. You go back and you make sure that you're assessing their skills, knowledge, experience and behaviours, and making sure that where they are not necessarily as experienced as they could be, that their supervision is high. And that's about looking at the organisational strategy of that body as well, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that the key thing here, as we talked about interfacing trades and so on, you've got the products which pass through each other, but you've also got the anchors being cast into the RC frame.
Yeah.
And you've got the installers, which they've got their own contract with the contractor, yes, but it is still part of the diligence which an HRB should be getting.
Absolutely.
That you're actually being mindful of these other parties and making it as simple and streamlined as it can be, but also that you are doing your own checks, not just blindly keeping isolated as a product.
Absolutely. Don't assume that building control records are going to be sufficient. They will sample. They'll probably go down once every couple of weeks or so to actually view the property, and they're only going to get a snapshot in time. So what they're going to ask you in an ideal Gateway 3 information is for sampling. Can you provide evidence that this has been fitted properly? And I'm sure you probably can.
Yeah.
But, that should be evidence which is gathered about your specific interest in that property. And it should be catalogued by the contractors. So the capability of taking a photograph becomes extremely important, using particular information as well that's actually going to get through. And most of the geotagging information's on a photograph these days anyway, isn't it? But yeah.
And certainly what we've found is we've got those systems which, yes, a picture would be taken when it's being installed, but a picture would be taken when critical components like a balcony connection, critical to life safety.
Yeah.
They can actually be assessed by AI as well to ensure that you've got the maximum safety impact by looking out and seeing if you can identify from those pictures, if you've got a connection, you've got a welded joint there, how good's the penetration and various other aspects of it is critical to life safety. Assessing it with AI gives you an additional opportunity, which isn't only available if pictures are taken of.
No, absolutely.
Individual connection. So
do you catalogue all of those thousands of connections that you actually make?
Yeah, we do. Absolutely. We've got an app we call Passport, which is a seamless end-to-end golden thread, if you like, of our balcony information. We've run it for several years, predates Grenfell even, the management process, but we take from one step to the next step to the next step in the factory. It has to have certain checks done, certain photos taken, and one of the things we implemented back in 2014 is if you're the second stage and managing that second part in the factory, and the first stage hasn't done their quality checks, don't do any work on it. Don't go down.
Yeah.
But these are the processes which are made easier. We're going back to Dame Hackett's car scenario. Imagine if cars are made in your driveway out of components people were fabricating on your driveway.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the process and controls of that factory process and giving people the ability to control that, but also aside of that, you've got the accountability which comes with traceability, which is only a good thing as well.
I'm interested to know, on your SIS development, the one that's just received Gateway 3 approval, did they ask for sampling on that?
I know very little about the approval right now.
Oh, okay.
I only learned last week that it got approval, but we will be hopefully watch the space. We've got a podcast coming as a special look here, because it is the first project in the UK
to actually see
new build to receive Gateway 3 approval. So we'll be unpacking that fairly shortly.
Oh no, it'd be useful to know. Be useful to know. Yeah.
As we draw to a close, I'd be interested in a key takeaway you have for the audience.
It's an interesting question. I think the key takeaway, certainly for right the way across the board, not just in scope buildings, is that I would get used to, as designers and contractors, as to managing the expectation of the regulators. You know, when I say regulators, I mean local authority building control, registered building control approvers, and the building safety regulator. I think it's absolutely essential that they can reflect on the confidence that's actually provided at design stage and through construction stage. Remember that building control is dramatically reduced in available qualified resource. All of those class 1 inspectors need to be supervised by the class 2 and 3 inspectors.
Yeah.
And you need to be able to convince them at the end of that job that your job actually complies. And I think the only way to do that is to take a firm control and make sure that, you know, if you're a domestic builder, you want to make sure that you're taking photographs. You want to make sure that they're geotagged. You want to make sure that they're date and time stamped. You want to make sure that it's almost daily, to make sure that you get that, you know, you get your foundation pictured, you get your oversight pictured, your oversight preparation pictured, that you take, you know, the interaction on particular junctions when you're building up the insulation pictured. And you have that evidence there, because it's, you know, building control bodies are going to prioritize, the regulators are going to prioritize what they actually inspect. And when it comes to the end of the job, if they've missed inspection stages, it's going to be those contractors and designers that need to fill those gaps. Yeah. And I think if you get used to managing the expectations of the regulator, providing them with confidence that you know what you're doing and you're building a thorough catalogue of approval, of compliance, then it will be an awful lot better. It really will. Life will become an awful lot easier for the people who are diligent in building those records. I really do believe that.
Well, that's great to hear, and we appreciate your time today. My takeaway, I think, is from a sentiment point of view, we've seen and we feel very much for those who are directly affected by all the delays. Mm-hmm. It's having an impact on thousands of lives and businesses and so on. However, the sentiment does seem to be improving. There does seem to be differences being made in the BSR, and we're glad to be feeling that difference. And on certainly in the last few weeks, has been a lot more positivity around that. So
yeah, I think that the evidence that I saw within the HSE during the working groups was one of extreme compliance and expectation of the designers and regulators. I think under Andy Rowe's direction, you're probably going to end up with a little bit more useful guidance, you know, general guidance. Maybe not that dissimilar to what I used to write for my approved inspector that I referred to before, but, you know, it could actually shape a really positive way forward. Gateway 3 buildings are quite simple in concept, aren't they? They're just boxes that sit on top of each other from a fire point of view, and they just need to be fire resistant to the extent required inside your regs. Very often they won't go as far as employers' requirements will. And I think that they've got the right people at the top of the tree now that are used to, as they've come up the ranks of the brigade, they're used to actually sort of being fairly pragmatic in the way that they see regulations develop. And they know that there's more than one way of skinning a cat. There's much more than one way of complying. They're not looking at it from a layman's point of view, from somebody that isn't used to the process of building and building in compliance. So I think that change in tack and that change at the helm will hopefully cascade down to the regulators' more expeditious consideration of compliance. Hopefully.
Yeah. Well, a big thank you to you, Andy, for joining us, and a big thanks to the audience for watching this insightful opportunity to talk about building control in a whole new world from what we were if we want the clock back 10, 20 years. If you'd like to hear more conversations about fire safety, about what's happening in the industry more generally, tune into the next Resibuild podcast and watch this space for more fire-related and more topical content like sustainability and so on as well. But thank you, Andy, and thank you for joining us today.
Okay.